We're making basil pesto today, and for this you need to have the freshest, most fragrant basil leaves available. If you grow your own, try to pick your basil when the leaves are small, because smaller leaves have much more flavor, they're sweeter, they taste less like mint and more like basil. I like to wash the basil thoroughly to get rid of any sand and grit, and then spin it dry in a salad spinner. Make sure that there are no stems on the basil leaves because the stems are bitter and they're fibrous. And we're going to use our food processor to make the pesto. We're going to put our basil leaves, after they are spun dry, into the bowl of the food processor. You want to pack in as much as possible. Even if it looks like a lot, once the motor starts running, they're going to really shrink down. And this is about 2 bunches of basil. So it's going to yield maybe a cup and a half of pesto in the end. So you put your basil leaves in and you're going to add some salt to this. We're going to put in our garlic. And we're going to put in some pine nuts. Now the pine nuts that I use are not toasted. If you want to toast them, you certainly can. I find that they have a more delicate flavor when they're not toasted, so you taste the basil more. I did not add any Parmigiano cheese at this point, and I don't want to. I want to fold it in by hand later to retain a more rustic texture. So we add in the olive oil in a thin, steady stream until we emulsify the mixture. And you know that it's enough olive oil when the mixture has a nice pale green color and it makes a gargling sound. Stop the machine when you see that it's emulsified and you want to push down any of the pieces that haven't been properly pureed. Use a rubber spatula to do this. Now, traditionally this would have been done in a mortar with a pestle, not in a food processor. You're welcome to do that. It does take a little bit more strength and a little bit more time. And the word pesto comes from pestare, which is the verb in Italian that means to pound, because you would have used a mortar and a pestle to pound the basil with the garlic, with the pine nuts. So as I mentioned, the cheese, the Parmigiano, we're going to add it by hand at this point, and this is crucial to the texture of the pesto because we're going to retain some of that rustic texture to the cheese. It's not all going to get mixed into the food processor. It doesn't get all broken up and pureed. So you can see it thickens up the pesto nicely, and you can still see individual strings of cheese, which is important to the final flavor. You can freeze it if you like. My suggestion would be to freeze it before you add the cheese. It freezes better if there's no cheese in it. You can put it into ice cube trays. If you're going to hold it at room temperature or in the refrigerator for an hour or 2, I suggest that you put a film of olive oil on the top and then you press down a piece of plastic wrap so that it doesn't oxidize. We have our potato gnocchi that we've made fresh, as well as our basil pesto and string beans. Now we're using the string beans today. They're optional, but they do add a lot of great flavor and color to the dish. You want to salt your boiling water rather generously. And then in the boiling water, you're going to put in some trimmed green beans. These green beans are going to cook right in the water in which we'll later cook the gnocchi. And this is traditional in Liguria, the area where potato gnocchi and basil pesto are typically made. The beans have to be fully cooked before you put the gnocchi in, because the gnocchi only take about a minute and a half once they reach the boiling water. So make sure that you like the texture of the beans before you add the gnocchi. Use the parchment paper to put the gnocchi into the boiling water like a funnel. And that's really going to be helpful so that you don't splash yourself with boiling water. And then you want to give your gnocchi a stir. And you want to put the lid back onto the pot so that the water comes back to a boil rapidly. You want the gnocchi floating to the surface quickly. Now your pesto that we've made is not going to get heated up. Pesto is a room temperature sauce. If you heat it, it's going to lose its flavor. So you want to warm it up a little bit with some of that viscous, starchy pasta water. And not only is it going to heat up the pesto without overheating it. It's also going to thin it out because you see the pesto needed to be a little bit more fluid in order to coat the gnocchi nicely. So the pasta water definitely helps for that. When the gnocchi float to the surface, take them out of the boiling water, take the beans out as well. Just a little handheld strainer like that works beautifully. A little bit more of the pasta water is fine because, like I said, you need to dilute that pesto. So you stir very gently. Remember that our gnocchi have no egg, and therefore they are more delicate. They're much more tender, and so you don't want to mix too much, just enough to get them well coated with the sauce. And looking at the texture here, I can already see we need to add a little bit more of the pasta water to loosen it up. You don't want to resort to having to add a whole lot of olive oil. Olive oil has great flavor, but it also comes with a lot of calories, and it might make the sauce too heavy if you add more olive oil just to get a nice fluid consistency. So the pasta water is definitely going to be helpful here. You can see it's got a beautiful texture. It's ready to serve. If you want, you can certainly put a little bit of Parmigiano over the top, but there's plenty of Parmigiano in the pesto. So this is a perfect plate of potato gnocchi in basil pesto. Buon appetito.